The avoidant person who hurt you, who couldn't show up for you, who pushed you away through their patterns of withdrawal and emotional unavailability, is about to take the biggest loss of their relational life. They don't fully realize it yet. Right now, in the immediate aftermath of the ending, or the distance they created, they might feel relief, might convince themselves they made the right choice, might focus on the ways the relationship felt uncomfortable or demanding. They're operating within their familiar defensive framework, where endings are necessary escapes and where losing people is acceptable cost of maintaining their protective independence. But time is about to reveal something to them that will fundamentally shift their understanding of what they lost and what they'll never find again. You're not just another person they dated who they can dismiss or forget. You're not just another relationship that didn't work out because of generic incompatibility or bad timing. You represent something rare that they encountered and destroyed through their dysfunction, and the recognition of this rarity, of what you actually were and what you offered that they couldn't receive, is going to haunt them in ways that their previous relationship endings never have. The L they're about to take is not just losing you in the moment. It's the progressive realization, unfolding over months and years, that they had access to something genuinely valuable and threw it away because their wounds prevented them from recognizing and honoring what was right in front of them. This realization will come through specific experiences, trying to find someone who compares to you and consistently failing, recognizing qualities in you that they took for granted, but that are actually exceptionally rare, seeing you thrive and transform without them in ways that prove you were never the problem, watching you build the life and possibly the relationship you deserved while they remain stuck in the same patterns with the same outcomes. The biggest L comes not from losing you, but from the full recognition of what you were worth, what you offered, and what their patterns cost them. This recognition is devastating because it cannot be undone, cannot be rationalized away, and forces them to confront that their defensive strategies, the very patterns they've relied on to feel safe, are actually destroying their chances at the fulfillment and connection they want underneath all their defenses. The loss they'll never recover from, losing someone who saw their worth. The first and most fundamental way you're giving the avoidant person the biggest L they ever took is through the specific nature of what they lost. They lost someone who saw their worth, who looked past their defenses to the person underneath, who appreciated their positive qualities while understanding their wounds, and who offered them something most people never offer: avoidant people, genuine acceptance, combined with healthy boundaries. This particular loss is uniquely devastating because it's not something they can replace or find again easily, and the recognition of this irreplaceability is what creates the lasting impact. Most people who get involved with avoidant people fall into one of two categories. The first category includes people who see the avoidant's defenses and patterns and interpret them as the avoidant's true nature, never looking deeper to recognize the wounded person underneath, who is trying to protect themselves from intimacy that feels dangerous. These people give up relatively quickly, or they stay while resenting the avoidant person, never truly accepting or understanding them. The second category includes people who see the wounded person underneath, but who enable the patterns, who accept poor treatment indefinitely, who have such weak boundaries that the avoidant person loses respect for them. These people might accept the avoidant, but the acceptance comes without the self-respect that would require the avoidant to do better. You represented a third category, rare and valuable, someone who saw both the avoidant person's worth and their patterns, who understood the wounds driving the dysfunction, who accepted the person while refusing to accept poor treatment, who offered genuine love combined with firm boundaries. You looked at the avoidant person with clear eyes and saw someone worthy of love and someone engaging in behaviors that prevented them from receiving that love. This combination of seeing their worth while not tolerating their dysfunction is extraordinarily rare, and the avoidant person likely took it for granted while it was available because they were too defended to recognize how unusual it was. The avoidant person won't immediately recognize the magnitude of this loss. Initially, they might feel relieved to be free of what they experienced as pressure or demands. But as time passes and they encounter other people, they'll begin to recognize that most people don't offer what you offered. They'll meet people who judge them harshly for their patterns without seeing past the defenses to the person worthy of compassion. They'll meet people who accept them, but whose acceptance comes from their own dysfunction or low standards, rather than from genuine understanding. They'll meet people who see their potential, but who don't have the patience or the capacity to hold space for their patterns. Through all these encounters, they'll progressively recognize that you were different, that you saw them in ways most people don't, and that they lost someone rare. This recognition is particularly painful because the avoidant person will realize that you seeing their worth was not naive optimism or projection. You saw them accurately, both their positive qualities and their limitations. You weren't idealizing them or making them into someone they weren't. You were seeing the reality of who they are, the good and the difficult, and you were offering relationship that honored both. This clear-sighted acceptance is what most humans want at the deepest level, to be truly seen and still loved, to have someone understand your flaws and still choose you, to be accepted not despite your imperfections, but with full awareness of them. The avoidant person had this, and they pushed it away because their defenses couldn't tolerate the vulnerability that receiving this kind of love requires. The loss of someone who saw their worth is particularly devastating because it forces the avoidant person to confront that they are capable of being loved, that the problem is not that they're unlovable, but that they're unavailable for love. When they're with people who reject them or who never truly see them, they can tell themselves that people don't understand them or that they haven't found the right person. But you understood them and you still loved them, which means the barrier to relationship was not lack of understanding or compatibility, but rather their own defensive patterns. This recognition is harder to bear than believing they simply haven't found the right person because it locates the problem within themselves and their choices, rather than in external circumstances. The avoidant person will also recognize, eventually, that you loved them not for what they could give you, but for who they were. You weren't with them for their resources or their status or what they provided materially or socially. You saw something in them as a person that you valued and wanted to build with. This kind of love, based on genuine appreciation of someone's inherent qualities rather than on what they can provide, is rare and precious. Many relationships are partially transactional or based on surface-level attraction that fades, but you offered something deeper, and the avoidant person's inability to receive it will become one of their biggest regrets as they mature enough to recognize the difference between superficial connections and genuine seeing and accepting. The biggest L in losing someone who saw their worth is that this loss is permanent in a specific way. They can meet new people, can date others, can even find relationships that last longer or that feel easier, but they'll never find you again. They'll never find the specific combination of qualities you possessed, the particular way you understood them, the exact balance of acceptance and boundaries that you offered. People are not interchangeable, and the avoidant person's pattern of treating people as replaceable will be challenged by the progressive recognition that you were not replaceable, that what you offered was unique to you, and that losing you means losing something they will never encounter again, in quite the same form. How your transformation is the mirror they can't look away from. The second way you're giving the avoidant person the biggest L they ever took is through your transformation after leaving them. Your growth, your healing, your evolution into more confident and self-assured version of yourself, your building of life that reflects your values and your worth. All of this serves as mirror that reflects back to the avoidant person exactly what they lost and exactly what they're still stuck in. This mirror is inescapable and devastating because it proves that you were never the problem and that their patterns are the limitation keeping them from the very things they claim to want. While you were with the avoidant person, they might have perceived you as having certain limitations or flaws. Perhaps they saw you as too emotional, too needy, too invested, too demanding. Perhaps they focused on ways you fell short of some idealized image they held. Perhaps they told themselves that your needs or your desire for closeness were the problem that made the relationship difficult. These perceptions allowed them to avoid examining their own patterns by locating the problems in you. But your transformation, after leaving them, obliterates this narrative and forces them to confront that you are not the problem. Your transformation might include emotional growth, where you process the relationship, heal from the hurt they caused, and emerge with greater understanding of yourself and your patterns. This growth demonstrates emotional capacity and resilience that contradicts any narrative they had about you being too emotional or unstable. You proved capable of sitting with difficult feelings, working through them, and coming out stronger. The emotional maturity you display in moving forward with grace rather than with bitterness shows that you have the capacity they accused you of lacking, and your capacity was always there. Their patterns simply prevented them from seeing it or from creating conditions where your best self could show up. Your transformation might include building life that reflects your values and that demonstrates you never needed them to be happy or fulfilled. You pursue your goals, you invest in your friendships and family, you develop new interests or deepen existing ones, you create life that is rich and meaningful without them. This autonomous fulfillment contradicts their perception that you were too dependent on them or that you needed them for your happiness. You prove that you have the independence and self-sufficiency that they claim to value, but you can access these qualities without the defensive rigidity that characterizes their version of independence. You can be self-sufficient and available for connection, a balance they cannot achieve. Your transformation might include dating someone new who can actually meet your needs, who shows up consistently and vulnerably, who commits to building partnership with you. If the avoidant person witnesses or hears about this, either through social media or through mutual connections, it serves as devastating proof that the problem was never your capacity for relationship, but rather their incapacity. You found someone who can do what they couldn't do: sustain intimacy, show up consistently, commit without ambivalence, meet your needs while maintaining their own sense of self. This new relationship, if it exists, and if they become aware of it, is mirror showing them that you deserved better than what they offered, and that better was actually possible and available, just not with them. Your transformation is mirror, not just in what you're doing, but in what you're not doing. You're not falling apart without them. You're not stuck, pining, or unable to move forward. You're not engaging in self-destructive patterns or relationship patterns that repeat the dynamic you had with them. You're actually healing and growing and moving forward in healthy ways. This healthy forward movement is stark contrast to what the avoidant person might be experiencing, repeating the same patterns with new people, staying stuck in the same defensive routines, not growing or learning from what happened, continuing to sabotage connections that could be meaningful. Your trajectory is upward while theirs is flat or cyclical, and this contrast becomes increasingly apparent over time. The mirror your transformation provides is particularly painful for the avoidant person because it forces them to see themselves through comparison. They see your growth and they see their stagnation. They see your healing and they see their continued woundedness. They see your forward movement, and they see themselves stuck in the same place. They see you becoming more of who you're meant to be, and they see themselves remaining trapped in defensive patterns that prevent growth. This comparison is inescapable if they have any awareness of your life, and even if they don't directly observe you, they feel the comparison internally as they recognize they're not growing while you presumably are. Your transformation also serves as mirror for what could have been. The avoidant person sees the person you're becoming and recognizes that you could have become this person with them, that the relationship could have been vehicle for mutual growth rather than for mutual pain. They recognize that they could have been part of your transformation, supporting your growth while allowing you to support theirs, building partnership that made both people better. Instead, their patterns meant they were obstacle to your growth rather than contributor to it, and they have to watch from outside as you flourish without them in ways you couldn't flourish with them. The mirror is inescapable because the avoidant person cannot unsee your transformation once they become aware of it. They cannot convince themselves you were the problem when you're clearly thriving. They cannot tell themselves the relationship failed because of your limitations when your limitations are being transcended, or were never real limitations at all. They cannot maintain their defensive narratives about why things didn't work when the evidence of your growth and health contradicts those narratives. The mirror forces truth upon them that their defenses tried to avoid, that they had someone valuable who was capable of growth and partnership, and they lost that person not because of the person's inadequacy, but because of their own. The comparison game they'll play with every person after you. The third way you're giving the avoidant person the biggest L they ever took is through the comparison game they'll inevitably play with every person they encounter after you. This game is not conscious or deliberate choice. It's automatic psychological process where every new connection is measured against what they had with you, and these comparisons consistently reveal that what they had was more valuable than they recognized while they had it. This ongoing comparison creates lasting impact because it prevents them from fully investing in new connections while constantly reminding them of what they lost. The comparison game begins immediately as the avoidant person starts to encounter new people or to engage with existing connections. They meet someone new and automatically assess how this person compares to you. Is this person as understanding as you were, as patient, as intelligent, as attractive, as compatible with their interests and values? In most cases, the new person falls short in one or more dimensions, and these shortcomings become increasingly apparent as the avoidant person gets to know them better. The person might be attractive, but lack your emotional depth. Or they might be emotionally available, but lack your independence. Or they might share the avoidant person's interests, but lack your particular way of challenging them intellectually. In each comparison, something is missing that you possessed. The comparison game is particularly cruel because it highlights that you weren't just good in isolated dimensions, but that you represented a rare combination of qualities that work together to create unique value. The new person might match or exceed you in one specific area, but they don't have the particular constellation of qualities that made you you. The avoidant person recognizes that qualities don't exist in isolation, that the value of a person comes from how their various qualities interact and combine, and that your specific combination is not something they're finding elsewhere. This recognition makes you increasingly irreplaceable in their mind as time passes and as they continue meeting people who don't compare favorably overall, even if they excel in specific areas. The avoidant person will also compare how they feel with new people to how they felt with you. Do they feel as understood, as challenged, as attracted, as comfortable, as excited? For many avoidants, the feelings they had with you were more intense or more genuine than what they experience with others, and this intensity is part of what triggered their defenses and drove them to push you away. But now that they're with people who don't trigger the same intensity of feeling, they recognize that the intensity was actually valuable, that it was evidence of real connection and compatibility, and that the absence of such intensity in new connections means those connections feel flat or unsatisfying, even if they're easier to maintain. The comparison game extends beyond romantic connections to how the avoidant person evaluates their overall life satisfaction. They compare how their life felt when you were in it to how it feels now without you. Were they happier then? More engaged? More motivated? Did they laugh more, feel more alive, have more interesting experiences? If their life feels emptier or less vibrant without you, this comparison forces them to recognize that you added value to their life in ways they didn't fully appreciate, that your presence enhanced their experience in ways they took for granted, and that losing you meant losing not just a person, but a quality of life they haven't been able to recreate. The avoidant person will compare how new people treat them to how you treated them. New people might be less patient with their patterns, less understanding of their wounds, less willing to accommodate their needs for space or independence. Or conversely, new people might be too accommodating, accepting their patterns without challenge or boundaries, which reduces the avoidant person's respect for them. The comparison highlights that you struck a balance that was actually ideal. You understood their patterns without enabling them. You gave them space without letting them take you for granted. You challenged them while respecting their boundaries. This balance is incredibly rare, and the absence of it in new connections makes the avoidant person recognize how valuable it was. The comparison game creates a trap for the avoidant person where they cannot fully invest in new connections because they're constantly measuring those connections against you and finding them wanting. They might start dating someone new, but find themselves thinking, this person isn't as funny as they were, or this person doesn't get me the way they did, or this feels easier but also emptier than it felt with them. These comparisons prevent them from giving new people fair chance because they're competing with idealized memory of you, a memory that grows more positive over time as the difficult aspects fade and the positive aspects are highlighted. The comparison game also extends to how the avoidant person compares their behavior with you to their behavior with others. They might recognize that they treated you worse than they've treated subsequent partners, that their patterns were more pronounced with you because you mattered more and therefore triggered more anxiety. This recognition is painful because it means they destroyed their most valuable connection through their worst behavior, that they sabotaged the relationship with the most potential because that potential was what scared them. They might treat new people somewhat better, but those people matter less, so the better treatment feels hollow. They gave their worst to the person who deserved their best, and this inversion creates lasting regret. The biggest L in the comparison game is that the avoidant person becomes unable to move forward fully because they're stuck comparing everyone to you. Years can pass, multiple relationships can come and go, and they're still measuring people against the standard you set. This stuck position prevents them from finding fulfillment while constantly reminding them that they had something valuable that they lost through their own dysfunction. The comparison game is self-inflicted torture that they cannot stop playing because you established a standard in their mind that others simply don't meet. Why this L hits, different than every other relationship they ruined. The fourth way you're giving the avoidant person the biggest L they ever took is through the specific characteristics that make this loss different from and more impactful than their previous relationship failures. The avoidant person has likely ended or sabotaged other relationships before you. They have a pattern of pushing people away, of being unable to sustain intimacy, of prioritizing their defenses over connection. But the loss of you hits different, hurts more, leaves a lasting mark that previous losses didn't leave, and understanding why this is reveals the unique magnitude of what they lost. This loss hits different because of timing in the avoidant person's life. Perhaps they're older now and more aware of patterns repeating, more conscious that time is finite and opportunities are limited. Perhaps they're reaching age where their peers are building families and long-term partnerships while they remain alone in their defensive isolation. Perhaps they're facing life transitions or challenges that highlight the absence of intimate partnership and support. The loss of you at this particular time in their life, combined with growing awareness that their patterns are costing them the connections they claim not to need, creates impact that earlier relationship failures didn't create when they were younger and still believed they had unlimited time and opportunities. This loss hits different because of who you were relative to what they said they wanted. Many avoidants have specific stated preferences about the kind of person they could be with. Someone independent, not too emotional, respectful of boundaries, intellectually engaging, whatever their particular list includes. In previous relationships, they could tell themselves those people weren't right because they didn't meet these preferences. But you met them. You were what they said they wanted. You had the independence they claimed to value, the emotional regulation they said they needed, the respect for boundaries they insisted upon. And they still couldn't maintain the relationship, not because you fell short of their preferences, but because even when someone meets all their stated preferences, intimacy still triggers their defenses. This recognition means they can no longer blame their relationship failures on not finding the right kind of person. They found the right person, and they still couldn't do it. This loss hits different because of the level of understanding and acceptance you offered. In previous relationships, the avoidant person might have been with people who didn't understand attachment theory, who didn't recognize the wounds driving the patterns, who simply reacted to the push-pull without comprehending its source. But you understood. You saw their patterns clearly. You recognized the attachment wounds. You understood what was happening and why. And even with that understanding, even with the compassion that came from seeing their wounds, you still left. Because understanding doesn't mean you have to tolerate poor treatment. This particular loss carries the weight of knowing that even when someone truly understood them, that understanding wasn't enough to make the relationship work, that their patterns are strong enough to destroy even connections built on genuine comprehension and compassion. This loss hits different because you left with dignity and strength that previous partners might not have displayed. If previous partners left with high emotion, with anger, or dramatic scenes, the avoidant person could dismiss those exits as evidence that those people were too emotional or unstable. But you left calmly, with boundaries intact, with self-respect apparent, demonstrating that your departure was considered choice rather than emotional reaction. This dignified exit is harder to dismiss or rationalize away. The avoidant person has to respect your choice, even if they regret its impact. And this respect means the loss carries more weight than losses they could dismiss or minimize. This loss hits different because of what it reveals about the sustainability of their patterns. Perhaps the avoidant person could maintain illusion through previous relationships that they would eventually find someone they could sustain connection with, that the right person would make intimacy feel safe enough, that their defenses wouldn't activate so strongly. But losing you might represent a moment where this illusion becomes untenable. If they couldn't maintain intimacy with someone as compatible and understanding as you, if their patterns were strong enough to destroy a relationship with this much potential, they're forced to confront that the problem is not about finding the right person, but about their own capacity. This confrontation is devastating because it means their patterns might prevent them from ever having the intimate partnership they want underneath all their defenses. This loss hits different because it's combined with watching you move forward and thrive while they remain stuck. In previous relationship endings, The avoidant person might have been the one who appeared to move on most successfully, who seemed fine while their ex-partners struggled. But with you, they might be the one who is more affected, who struggles more with the ending, who remains stuck, thinking about what was lost, while you demonstrate forward movement and growth. This reversal of the typical pattern forces them to experience being the one who lost more, being the one who struggles with the ending, being the one who cannot move on easily. And this unfamiliar position creates lasting impact. This loss hits different because of the self-awareness it eventually creates. With previous relationships, the avoidant person might have maintained their defensive narratives without significant self-examination. But losing you, perhaps combined with age and repeated pattern, recognition, might finally crack their defenses enough that genuine self-awareness begins to emerge. They might finally recognize their patterns as patterns rather than as isolated incidents. They might finally acknowledge their role in relationship failures rather than blaming circumstances or partners. They might finally see that their defensive strategies are not protecting them, but rather destroying their chances at fulfillment. This self-awareness, if it emerges, is painful because it means confronting years or decades of denial and recognizing that they've been their own worst enemy. The biggest L comes when all of these factors combine to create moment where the avoidant person fully recognizes what they lost in you, what their patterns cost them, and what they will likely never find again. This recognition might come years after the relationship ended, during a moment of clarity or crisis or simple reflection. They see that you were rare, that what you offered was valuable, that their inability to receive it was their limitation, not yours, and that they destroyed something precious through patterns they could have addressed if they'd been willing to do the work. This recognition is permanent and irreversible. They cannot unknow it once they know it. They cannot unsee it once they see it. And they cannot undo the loss because you're gone, moved on, living your life without them, having given them chance they couldn't take. The biggest L is not just losing you. It's the full recognition of what you were, what they threw away, and what they'll carry this knowledge for the rest of their life, comparing everyone to you and finding them wanting, wondering what could have been if they'd been capable of receiving what you offered, living with regret that no amount of new relationships or defensive rationalizations can erase.